these events. I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to give it over to Stephen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And we'll go more or less straight into the PowerPoint that I have made. So yeah, I'll start with a bit of an introduction. My name is Stephen McEvoy. I am a system engineer at Sellafield Ltd. I have been for the last 7 years since joining as a graduate in 2013. Recently did a master's at Lancaster University, graduated just over a year ago, and I've been a chartered engineer with the IMechE for about the last 6 weeks, so I'm still very new to it. Like many engineers, I've got a few engineering related hobbies at home that I quite often restore or modify in some way. And a recent 3D printer that I bought about March last year. So that's sort of what the talk's about, because within 2 weeks of buying that first printer, things got a bit fast-paced and a bit silly. So this presentation, my part of my experience in the response to the PPE shortage due to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. So I want to sort of start off by discussing what makes engineers engineers. So there are a few things I think. You might disagree. Please put something in the comments. I think certainly one of the top things engineers are resourceful, because no matter what we do, we have constraints. We don't always have everything that we need, but we do our best to manage anyway. Inventive. Part of what being an engineer is to develop things that make life better or easier. Forward-looking, and we embrace new technology most of the time. Innovative, always trying to improve things. And certainly a personal one for me is motivated to help people. That's, I think, why I got into engineering. That I want to improve things, whether it's safety or a product or anything. It's ultimately the reason is to help people. That doesn't always, I find, come easy and naturally to engineers. Sometimes we'd much rather get stuck into the technical stuff and work on our own and go in with that really technical engineering mindset. But you really do have to, I find, to get the most out of your idea or your design or even just collaborative. You have to work with all manner of different people, often outside of the engineering profession. And I think it's a vocation rather than a career. As I've said, I've got some hobbies related to engineering, and most engineers that I know have at least one thing that they do at home that is engineering related. It's very much a way of life. And I think the IMechE put it quite well on the strap line. They see it on the front of every magazine. When I sort of say about being motivated to help people, it is improving the world through engineering. So with that sort of what I see as a typical engineer, if my spreadsheet my slideshow would work properly, here we go. An introduction. I don't think COVID-19 needs much of an introduction. I think we're all aware of it. I think we've all been affected by it. But in March last year, it took the world by surprise, and it certainly, I think, took the UK by surprise, just how quickly it spread. By the time we were seeing cases in the UK, supply chains and the shipping from China had already been massively affected. The factories in China that had closed down, which is where we buy so much of everything that we use day to day. And at the same time, as cases start to spread through the UK and we started to understand how to protect ourselves from it, the demand for personal protective equipment increased rapidly overnight. And at the same time, as the number of cases going into hospitals and needing that intensive care spiked, so too did the demand for ventilators. So at that time, the UK became quite clear we were going to enter a so with that in mind, about a week beforehand, not knowing if it would arrive because of delivery problems and where it was even coming from, I thought, I'm going to be stuck at home. I might not even get to my workshop where I keep all my cars. I'm going to buy myself the 3D printer I've been promising myself for the last 5 or 6 years. I was surprised how cheap they've got and how much better. I think in 2014, £2,000 could get you an entry level, really basic printer. And the one I did buy, because I wasn't sure if I was really going to get into this hobby, I paid £140 for it as a refurbished, a Creality Ender 3 Pro, which is what everybody seems to have these days. Really good entry level printer if you're looking to get into it, because they're not the best technically, but everybody has one, everybody knows the weak points, and everybody seems to make upgrades for them. So yeah, on the right hand side, I've just got some BBC headlines from around that time, around March. So some of the district nurses that were concerned about the lack of PPE, some of the earlier mentions of 3D printing ways out of PPE shortages, the headlines that came out that some doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals were being told from on high not to publicise some of the people. So yeah, with that in mind, we'll go on to what I first started to look at. Once I got the printer and I joined some of the various forums and Facebook pages, I started to quickly see some of the efforts that were being made. And one of the first things before what we eventually did was the ventilator shortage. So there was a lot of talk about developing new valves that would allow one ventilator to ventilate 10 patients, and new ideas like this that were fantastic, but for quite a few reasons really couldn't be done on a printer at home, certainly not an entry level one. And the other thing that then came out was a more or less completely 3D printed ventilator that was developed. There were quite a few different designs for this as well, from different universities and things. And these new types were optimized for 3D printing, so they were really quite standard parts, easy to put together, really quick to go from design to different iterations of design, ironing out any problems to a working product, which is exactly what was needed in this time. But for these, a hobbyist such as myself, certainly especially somebody new to it, couldn't really get involved with these critical parts for quite a few reasons. So there was the quality, we couldn't guarantee in terms of CE marking, in terms of material spec, traceability, hygiene, in sort of manufacturing it in a clean room, and the liability of if anything that you supplied went wrong, you could potentially kill quite a few people. So it really had to be a company, or a big company that's used to making equipment that's fit for purpose and can be distributed and things, and that obviously comes with some delays. So I think some of the bigger companies that we all heard of that got involved with the ventilator projects were, I think, people like Dyson and JCB and some really big companies. So that seemed to be, they were the people to do that. And when it came to hobbyists with the little Ender 3s, that really wasn't a goer. So I then started to find out about some designs for face shields that were hitting the web. One from a Czech company that make 3D printers and have a lot of really good designs, Prusa. And you'll see on the top right picture, the top right is the frame of the Prusa visor. That was the first one that I started to look at. So I made a couple of those. And I find that with my little basic printer, it would take 8 hours to make a frame, which the design's fantastic. It's a really, really good design, but that was just a little bit too long. The other downside for them is the frame could be made, but it had to come in two parts because there was and the clear section on the front of the visor had to be laser cut from a non-standard size of sheet. So that was a nice design, and I think it did find a lot of traction. Really, I think the best thing for me to make. So I looked at some other similar designs. The top left was the next one I looked at. And then the bottom two, they're both obviously the same. That was what I settled on. I found the National 3D Printing Society had come up with this design that's on the bottom. Really simple. Even on a basic printer, it could be made in 2 hours. It was only one piece, but I think the real beauty of it, and I think often with 3D printing, this is where the benefits can be made, because you can design something that fits around an existing standard. The clear is just a standard A4 size binder cover, exactly the same as you'll have on the front of your dissertation if you submit it, or any report. And it's with a standard UK 4-hole hole punch. Gives you the 4 holes that, if you can see the 4 lugs that stick out of the frame, they're perfectly spaced to take that, and it's got 2 little tabs to hold the ends of the sheet in. That gives it its curve, and it's surprisingly a strong little thing with between sort of 100-200 micron clear sheet on the front. It becomes quite an effective little face sheet, certainly in terms of how quickly it can be made and how simple the design is. And it uses, I think it was 20 grams of material to make each one. So on a 20-pound roll of PLA filament, you could get about 50 out of that roll. So really, so it was still 2 hours to make. Not great, but I could start to make a few. As the National 3D Printing Scheme grew, they started to get some really big, not quite contracts, but schemes set up. So RS Components got involved, and I think TNT, or one of the courier firms, got involved to set up a distribution network. But the only economical way to do that was they would send you a box and you could send in frames, but it needed to be a minimum. I think it was 200 frames before they could accept them. And at my current rate of production, that was about 3 weeks production. And I thought, this is a lot of stuff that I'm making that's not going to see any use and be any benefit to anybody for quite a long time. So at that point, I quite innocently put a Facebook post on my local Facebook page, offering them up locally to anybody who needed them, thinking, well, this will probably be most of my 1 every 2 hours production. I think within the first hour I had 150 messages, most people wanting between 5 and 10. So it was definitely clearly in demand. So with that in mind, my girlfriend, who's an administrator at Lancaster University, got involved, helped to collate the orders and figure everything out, because at that point I was just like, expect this. Not really sure where to start with this. It was completely unexpected. So we started, still taking 2 hours at a time, got a bit of publicity, and things started to develop from there. And other social media from people that were producing very similar visors and face shields. I used a lot of that, because bear in mind, at the time I was still very much getting to grips with my brand new 3D printer and finding all the limitations of it very quickly. I found a lot of ways to increase the speed of how quickly I could produce these things. So I got it down from 2 hours each to 30 minutes each, with a combination of a larger print nozzle, higher temperatures, higher feed speeds, and really pushing the limits of what it could do while print. So yeah, that was quite a steep learning curve within a few days to get from that. So yeah, and the bottom right, then you can see a picture of my girlfriend and I with our newly made face shields on. Now that picture, because of her role at Lancaster University, ended up getting spread around national media. I think it's been in the Daily Mail and various other. It's never intended to be. It was meant to just be a quick Facebook snap, so not particularly flattering. But anyway, that post very quickly had a lot of local hospitals, GP surgeries. The Northwest Ambulance Service were one of the first as well, because they were really short on them. Care homes, pharmacies, and some of the schools that were still open as well. They were all straight on to us, looking for basically as many as we could produce. But it's worth bearing in mind that the orders were coming from the paramedics and the nurses and the GPs and the teachers and the extended family of all these key workers who were still going to work, not from the supply chains, not from the management. And I think that really comes back again to the liability issue, which I think was also what was causing a lot of the slowdown with the wider scheme. While they chased CE marking and things to get it into the proper supply channels, they weren't really getting where they needed to be. Some local people who have connections to key workers who were elsewhere also asked for some. So some, we had, I think, 20 went to Jersey. In Jersey, they may well not have somebody who's able to get visors to them that quickly. And we also had a relatively small number, really, went to London as well from people we know in the local area, purely because it was a hotspot there and they needed them as much as anywhere else did. But most of them stayed within Cumbria and Lancashire. I'm based in Ulverston, if you know the area, so it's sort of South Cumbria, not that far from Lancaster. As these things sort of hotted up and things gained traction and we got more publicity, we started to get offers of help from people. So we had orders for over 2,000 at that point, about 30 to 40 a day. And at that point then, really thankfully, we got offers from, in the end it was 8 people who helped. So this is where the collaboration comes in, that I think is so important and such a big part of this story. We had Dean Grierson, who's on the North Lancs Young Members Committee, who asked me to do this talk, was one of the first to get in touch. We had some people from BAE Systems in Barrow and Furness, Playdale Playgrounds in Ulverston donated their Ultimaker and one of their engineers. Furness College in Barrow running, and a good friend and colleague got in touch and said he'd been wanting to buy a printer for about as long as I have, and if he bought one and sent it to me, could I use it for the duration, and then when I'm finished with it, give it back to him. So yeah, I got that sent from Phil Griffith. I think he deserves a mention as well. So I went from having one printer to 2. It's a slightly better version of the one I bought, because by that point you couldn't buy an Ender 3 Pro for love nor money, because everybody was producing face shields with them. So I very quickly had not only my spare room producing visors, but my kitchen worktop as well. And again, put a larger nozzle on it, used all the tricks that I'd used on my first one, and suddenly doubled my own out. And all the while then trying to coordinate with a lot of help from my girlfriend, who's producing what, where they're going, in what order, how we're delivering them, how we're very much sort of small scale cottage industry, removing all the need for large organizations to get involved and things. It was mostly dropped off at the front door of a local nurse or something, managed through Facebook, with the focus really being on how quickly we can get these things out, because that's the beauty of 3D printing, is you can go from a half an hour, but it will take you half an hour to produce every one after that. So in the short term, while you're setting up something like injection molding for real series production, this can can fill the gaps for that sort of short to medium term. So that's what we were doing. Network then as well, and through their press that they put out, we were getting contacted by quite a lot of other people from outside the area who wanted to join in and do the same. And when the search, mine was the first name that came up, so they got in touch, asking for files and advice and how we were doing it and so on. And I was given quite a lot of advice to friends from home in Northern Ireland, from people in the Midlands, the south of England, all the way to Australia. There was somebody who was a Lancaster Uni alumnus who we just had how much that could spread so quickly, but really, really good. So yeah, I can't stress it enough that collaboration was the key thing here. The top picture with the quite massive stack was from one of our contributors in Barrow from BAE Systems. That was they had quite a extensively modified printer, and they really knew what they were doing with it. I think that was 2 days production. And the bottom one of the teddy bear, that was our guy from Playdale Playgrounds. That was his kid's teddy bear. That was a little picture he took. I think it was his first one that he produced. So that went on social media. And then the one on the right, that's me sitting on my living room floor building my new Ender 5 in a bit of a hurry, trying to get it set up to get producing these things as well. Things took off very, very quickly from that. So why did it work? You'll see in the picture, this was one of the many times in those few weeks that I took my printer to bits because something had broken on it. It's not built for 24-hour production and so many heat cycles. It's very much a hobbyist machine. And now, 6-9 months on, it's fairly recognizable from what it used to look like. As I've said, the real benefit to 3D printing here isn't the volume or the cost per unit or anything. It is how quickly you can start to produce stuff. And if your design isn't quite right, if something breaks, how quickly you can amend that design in a sort of iterative process and have the next design in your hands within half an hour to an hour. So the minimal setup time, I say my printer I think was £140. It was a refurbished one. I've spent quite a lot more on that than that on parts since then, but at the time it was very, very cheap. And when it came to these orders and things, we also immediately had loads of offers of people wanting to support financially. So people wanted to buy the visors, and I worked out the total cost is probably somewhere in the region of £1 each. Probably a little bit less, but we wanted to be able to cover people who may not be able to give us money for them. We also had other people wanting to donate just so that we could keep doing what we were doing, and we didn't have to slow down due to a lack of funds or anything. So that was really good. Logistics wise, we didn't have much to consider. We were mostly working in the local area. By that point, we had printers from Dean and Lancaster all the way to Barrow and Furness. We had others interested up the Cumbrian coast. So no matter where the people who needed them were, we probably had somebody quite close by that we could get them to them as quick as possible. There was no red tape to speak of. So with the national scheme, as it sort of grew arms and legs, it became almost a victim of its own success, because it started to have to chase CE marking to get it through the right channels and all these things that slowed it down massively. Because we were such a small scheme and dealing with staff members who were going to be wearing them, we managed to avoid all that, for better or worse. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do. There's red tape is there for a reason, standards and so on. But I think in terms of the ethics argument about producing sort of substandard protective equipment, I think it was a signed one at the time. It was very much an emergency situation, and very much the anything is better than nothing approach. I think also it was very dependent on the willingness of people in a time like that, when there is a shortage of PPE and people are at risk and everything's awful, the willingness of people to come together, it's the human condition, isn't it? But it's heartwarming to see that, and really, really helpful. Everybody was absolutely brilliant. I was just trying to play with my 3D printer, and the support that I got and the thanks and everything was absolutely amazing. Couldn't believe it. I should probably say were mostly from local people. Some local businesses were really helpful. Lancaster University donated, and so did Pure Leisure as well, another local company. They donated quite large sums, which was really helpful. The money that was left over at the end, actually, I did donate to the NHS charities for the Northwest and for the Morecambe Bay Trust. So that was about £1,000 left over at the end that went to them. And I think I've already said about 3D printing being really agile, so you don't need to wait for a tool to be manufactured to let you start making these parts. And if there is something not right, you don't have to wait for another tool to be manufactured. It is very much change it on the fly, improve it as you go, and that iterative, really collaborative. Because when it came to improving the process, in terms of how many can you fit onto a print bed, or how quickly can you do it, and what size nozzle works best, and what temperatures for each material, and all these different things, social media came into its own, because so many people across the country were producing very similar things with very similar printers, and we could share experience very, very quickly. And these were just low-cost hobby printers. As I've said, some of the guys we had printing for us were using some nicer stuff like Ultimakers, there's machines that are still multiple thousands of pounds, but a lot of them are very much just individuals using a £200 to £300 printer to produce these. But a lot of them modified for more reliability, higher outputs. The modifications you can do to these things are immense. There's so much scope for improving. As I said, mine, I think the frame and the screen are about the only thing original on mine at this point. But I am a serial tinkerer, so that was inevitable. So one of the things that I want to sort of start a discussion, if I can, thing like this as engineers, how quickly we can mobilize and help a cause, and it doesn't have to be part of our day jobs or anything, but it's ultimately why we're engineers, is wide in your home time, where engineers can step up, work together, and improve somebody's day or somebody's life. It doesn't have to be through 3D printing. It can be through knowledge that we have or a hobby that we have. And a lot of engineers will have welding equipment and fabrication equipment and electronics equipment and all this sort of stuff. So is there something we can do to help tackle the climate crisis at a small level, something fundamental, or poverty or famine, or even overburden on the NHS? Is there something that can be developed quite quickly by a lot of engineers in their living rooms? I think it's a really interesting time to be involved with stuff like this, because there is so much new technology out there and so much scope to work together remotely, especially in lockdowns such as this one, when we're all stuck at home and nobody can go to the pub or anything like that. It's to start a discussion on, and I'm keen to hear any ideas from anybody. Really, it just needs that initial spark. If somebody has an idea, I'm happy to discuss it. I know loads of people who'd be happy to discuss it, and as I've seen, these things can grow exponentially in a matter of days. So if you've got an idea, get in touch. So really, I think that's more or less all I've got to say. Thank you very much for listening. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions. If you do have any more questions or want to discuss anything else, my contact details are on the bottom of this slide. You can make a note of those. But yeah, I think I'm happy to open up to the Q&A session.
Awesome, thank you for that, Stephen. We had one from, we had a question earlier. Is there still a demand for face shields?
At the moment, there isn't. No. So it was a very concentrated demand over, I think, probably 3 weeks to a month, and through that time there were a few companies that were getting involved with setting up for real high volume production, which essentially is injection molding. There were quite a few companies in the UK that were setting up to do that. And the beauty of 3D printing compared to injection molding is purely how quickly you can start to get involved and get producing things. So it was a short-term thing, a real rapid sprint for that few weeks, and then demand completely just dropped off, which is good. That means hopefully there's enough PPE out there at the moment.
Awesome, thank you. Michael asks, what are you using the printers for now?
Well, the second printer that I was donated, that's gone to my friend. He's making all sorts of extras for his 1970s Land Rover that he rallies and does various different events with. My own printers, I've started a small eBay shop with some designs of functional things that I've drawn up and I've started to sell. So the first thing was my girlfriend bought an inflatable hot tub, and during lockdown, everybody else bought an inflatable hot tub, but all the filters came from China and they're all stuck somewhere in China. And this particular proprietary filter, where most of the other ones seem to use a push-on filter. So one of the first things I developed was a threaded adapter, so I could use the more readily available push-on hub on this hot tub. So those were selling like wildfire for a few weeks, again, because everybody bought inflatable hot tubs and couldn't get hold of filters while they were stuck at home. Since then, it's been, I quite like my Land Rovers as well. I used to run an old Land Rover, and the one problem I had on long journeys was the cup holders are atrocious. So I've modified my printer so I can print in ABS, because PLA, the sort of standard start you off material, doesn't do well in UV, doesn't do well in heat. It does deform and it does melt from about 60 degrees. So I've black ABS, and I've developed a cup holder that holds insulated containers, sort of your Chili's bottle and clean canteen bottle and thermos mugs and things, really, really nicely. And I've been selling those, and I've got quite a few ideas for different products as well. It's fantastic for reasonably low volume things. I'm not planning on retiring on it, but it's a nice little sideline that keeps me amused. So at the moment, I just have one printer, and that's what it's doing.
Awesome, thank you. Joshua asks, as someone who wants to start 3D printing but with no background experience, what advice would you give? And is CAD modeling an essential skill?
I don't think CAD modeling is. There are some new CAD packages that didn't exist 10 years ago when I first was doing my bachelor's and things. Fusion 3D, I think, is the real easy to get into one that you can get online with a free license. So I would recommend having a play with that, because it is really easy to pick up. But if you have no interest in 3D design or CAD or anything, you can download a huge amount of the most random stuff off the web. One of the best websites for that is called Thingiverse, and you can search for absolutely anything. Some of the ideas people have had, some of them are frankly quite scary, but some of them are fantastic. And you can download the files, run them through slicing software to turn it into code that will run your machine, so G code. And yeah, you can happily keep a 3D printer very busy without having to ever go near a CAD package. So I would say it's beneficial, but it's not essential. And in terms of buying a printer, I would say something like an Ender 3, which is the basic standard these days. There's nothing wrong with it. They will have their problems. They're not absolutely perfect out of the box, but they're like 200 quid, and everybody has experience with modifying them. And there are a few things, if you can spend £50 on the basics and get them up to scratch and solve most of their fundamental problems that they have. So yeah, I would recommend absolutely just get into it and play with it. If you're an engineer, then that's probably what you'd do anyway. So yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Andrew asks, he started printing files from people on Facebook Marketplace. Are there any other good ways to find customers?
I haven't really done much in terms of printing for people. I do have a listing on eBay, but I've not really had much interest in that. I have found I've got more interest in using my printer to print my designs and selling something as a finished product. But you might find through some of the freelance websites like Fiverr, freelancer.com, that you might pick up some work there. But so many people have printers now and they're so accessible. I think the market for that is very limited. But I'm willing to be proved wrong. I'm sure somewhere there is. There plenty of people don't have printers yet and are starting to wake up to what they can do and what they're wanting sort of spare obsolete parts for kitchen appliances or anything and everything. So there is probably a market there, but as printers get cheaper and more attainable, I can't see that particularly staying that way.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No, it appears there's no more questions. Okay, well, if that's okay with you, we're going to call it a night. Thank you, Stephen, for your
Thank you
talk.
very
Much
much.
appreciated for you taking time out to come. Thank you for everyone attending. We do appreciate you coming to these. You know, we try and put them on as often as we can. Keep up with relevant information and stuff like that. So yeah, if you want to follow the pages, in the link where you found this, there should be the link for our relevant social media page and stuff like that. Keep checking back. We are planning some more talks in the near future. They will all be on WebEx as well as still no face-to-face meetings. Hopefully they will return. But yeah, thank you all for coming. Natalie, if you want to start the recording now.